Mr. Saktiandi, Supaat.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this motion on Singapore's response to COVID-19 and the recently released white paper is a welcome first step to boost Singapore's capacity to weather not just the next pandemic, but other unforeseeable disruptions in future as well. It charts the broad directions that we need to head in to enhance our resilience as a small country that is susceptible to global or regional shocks. I will focus my speech on the more general thrust of how we should enhance Singapore's resilience as a nation. I will address how we can better prepare to prevent or manage significant disruptions to our way of life in four parts: in resources, in infrastructure, in manpower, and in mindsets. First, on resources. Early on in the pandemic, we saw how other countries implemented nationalistic and protectionist policies to restrict the export of essential medical supplies like medical-grade face masks as demand spiked locally. Being an import-dependent economy, Singapore initially suffered difficulties in securing critical medical supplies. Also, in early 2020, many countries, including Singapore, saw panic buying and hoarding of essential supplies amidst the uncertainty and prospect of having to be confined at home. In Singapore, we did well to keep supplies flowing and assuage Singaporeans of our sufficiency. In reviewing our stockpiling strategies, I hope the government will make the revised comprehensive list of critical items known to the public. As DPM Lawrence mentioned, I was glad to hear that there will be a fault planning sort of team and department that will be set up for future sort of crisis. I think the essential thing is whether we can determine what is the level of redundancy we need for each resource. While some of this information would concern national security, a limited disclosure to the public would reassure Singaporeans that we are disruption ready. There will inevitably be an additional cost as we build buffers and diversify our supply chains. Importantly, have we calculated how much more we are willing to pay for such insurance as compared to buying just enough and from the cheapest source? Moreover, does this mean that our government procurement guidelines need to be amended to facilitate this aim, or do existing value for money metrics accommodate this objective to ensure ourselves against unknown shocks? Finally, as we invest in boosting our local production capacity, our natural constraints mean that we will still have some reliance on foreign sources to augment our domestic solutions. Many Singaporeans may not know this, but we have Singapore-based PUB officers constantly stationed at the Johor River Waterworks, or JRWW, in Kota Tinggi, Malaysia, to ensure the smooth supply of imported water into Singapore. So yes, we have a group of Singaporeans who are working in Kota Tinggi on a daily basis. While these officers commuted daily across the causeway pre-COVID-19, many of them had to make personal sacrifices and spent up to 1 month per shift away from their families when the pandemic-related travel restrictions were enforced. They, like many others, are the unsung heroes in our fight against COVID-19, and we are all deeply grateful, and to their families too. Second, on infrastructure. The collaboration between our public and private sectors enabled large-scale care facilities to be mobilized and demobilized at speed during the pandemic. This helped to manage the stress on our permanent healthcare facilities as the number of cases peaked and ebbed. I look forward to hearing more concrete plans on how the government intends to design its facilities to be multi-use and redeployable into accommodation, medical, and other critical facilities during a crisis. However, I'm also concerned about more bespoke infrastructure for which substitutes are not readily available. For example, members may remember the publicized COVID-19 cluster outbreaks at the Jurong Fishery Port in July 2021 and Pasir Panjang Wholesale Centre in September 2021. As these are key nodes for the distribution of seafood, fruits and vegetables to our supermarkets, wet markets and hawker centres, it was unsurprising that these outbreaks grew to become one of Singapore's biggest community clusters with more than 1,000 linked cases. The PPWC had to close and cease operations for 3 days. In Toa Payoh East, for example, at the Toa Payoh East Lorong 7 wholesale night market in my constituency, they were similarly affected, closed voluntarily for 2 weeks after COVID-19 cases were discovered. So I would like to commend the National Environment Agency, NEA, Singapore Food Agency, SFA, and Enterprise SG for responding quickly to manage the virus spread and help traders activate alternative supply arrangements. And they've done so in Toa Payoh East too. Going forward, we may need to look at our preventive strategy to manage disruptions at such bespoke hubs and assess if there is sufficient capacity at alternate distribution ports and centres to handle contingencies that cripple a particular distribution centre. Third, on manpower, Mr. Speaker, a big plus that did not seem to be highlighted adequately in the white paper is how we managed to effectively redeploy manpower to where it is needed. One example would be how around 3,000 safe distancing ambassadors and enforcement officers were deployed and coordinated by the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment, MSE, to ensure compliance with safe management measures and vaccinated differentiated SMMs in public spaces. When commercial flights were suspended during the height of the pandemic, the Public Service Division quickly worked with the private sector to redeploy aviation workers to fill urgent manpower needs in both public healthcare institutions and public agencies. There was an added level of efficiency as the aviation staff already had the competencies to deliver basic care as care ambassadors. So I'm glad that the white paper has acknowledged the transferability of certain competencies across multiple jobs or roles in suggesting that the government will put in place a more centralized system to tag crisis times, roles, and training suitable individuals ahead of time. I have previously advocated for rationalizing disparate jobs and industries in our economy and identifying overlapping or complementary skill sets or competencies. This can form the basis of our other policies, for example, offering better job matching and placements at our CDCs and other agencies, or designing more structured training pathways under initiatives like Skills Future, where workers can progressively train in cross-sector skills and competencies. Separately, has the pandemic also helped to strengthen the Singapore core in our workforce? While it should remain Singapore's strength to remain open to the world even in the trying of times, the prolonged pandemic has seen expatriates and migrant workers return home to be with their families with no certainty of return. So I hope the Ministry of Manpower and relevant agencies are already looking at the data or will be on the trend of foreign workers and pass holders from before the pandemic up till today to assess and mitigate our manpower vulnerabilities going forward. Finally, on mindsets, as the white paper noted in the lessons to be learned from this COVID-19 episode, adaptability and flexibility will continue to be a key in tackling future pandemics or crises. Mr. Speaker, in Malay, please. Ini juga merupakan masa yang sesuai untuk merenung kembali sumbangan dan pengorbanan yang telah dilakukan oleh masyarakat Melayu Islam semasa kemuncak wabak COVID. Dari pekerja Barisan Hadapan Melayu Islam seperti doktor, jururawat, pekerja-pekerja sosial, penunggang hantaran, duta-duta jarak selamat dan semua yang bekerja siang dan malam, termasuk anggota kabinet dan kaki tangan kementerian yang menghasilkan dasar, perubahan peraturan dan langkah belanjawan dengan cepat untuk menangani krisis COVID, waktu kemuncak krisis COVID. Saya ingin mengambil kesempatan ini untuk mengucapkan terima kasih. Selain itu, agensi agama dan Melayu Islam kita juga terserlah. MUIS dan pejabat mufti memberikan hala tuju yang jelas, selaras dengan ajaran Islam pada masa yang sukar, kerana kami terpaksa mengurangkan kehadiran fizikal ke solat berjemaah dan upacara penting lain-lain. Peruntukan ditekankan khas untuk mereka yang terdedah, mengingatkan kita semua tentang keperluan untuk melindungi kesejahteraan komuniti kita semasa menjalankan tugas agama kita. Penggunaan teknologi digital adalah satu yang baik. Dia telah diperuntukkan dalam sesi-sesi dan slot jemaah di masjid-masjid, diadakan dengan pantas dan diselaraskan dengan baik. Saya juga amat terharu dan berbangga dengan kemajuan masyarakat dalam perhimpunan bersama seperti di bawah SG Teguh Bersatu, satu pasukan petugas kerja dengan sokongan pekerja sosial dan guru agama kami, menghasilkan rangka kerja daya, tahan psikososial untuk memupuk norma daya tahan diri, keluarga dan komuniti yang berdaya tahan dan menubuhkan rangkaian penjagaan dan e-forum interaktif untuk membantu setiap orang yang terjejas menghadapi gangguan dalam kehidupan seharian mereka. Mendaki juga membantu pelajar-pelajar kami yang memerlukan untuk mendapatkan peranti digital untuk pembelajaran dalam talian, manakala MUIS, masjid dan pusat pendidikan dan penyedia pendidikan Islam membantu melengkapkan asatiza kami dengan kemahiran untuk menyediakan kandungan agama dan dalam talian. Saya juga ingin mengambil peluang ini untuk mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Dewan Perniagaan dan Perindustrian Melayu Singapura (SMCCI) atas sokongan mereka yang disediakan kepada syarikat perniagaan kecil dan keluarga sewaktu menangani krisis wabak COVID. Mereka menunjukkan betapa semangat bergotong royong yang sebenar memacu daya tahan masyarakat. Mr. Speaker, in English, I'm sure many of us can agree that one positive from the past 3 years is the acceleration in our digitalization journey. Not only has GovTech rolled out nationwide data-driven tech solutions like Safe Entry and Trace Together as part of our pandemic management measures, ordinary Singaporeans have also gotten comfortable with operating in the digital space. There are a fair number of seniors in my constituency in Toa Payoh East, and I'm extremely heartened when they share that they now are able to talk to their grandchildren more often over video calls or watch performances online over Zoom, and I think more importantly also be able to make bill payments to agencies in the comfort of their own home. More of our heartland merchants and hawkers are also hooked up onto digital payment solutions and electronic delivery platforms, which was hastened during the COVID period. This is all in part down to the efforts of NEA and SFA to reach out to stallholders during the pandemic. These intensive outreach efforts had also helped to achieve a 99.9% vaccination rate across hawker centres, wet markets and coffee shops, and to implement rostered routine testing regime to test thousands of hawkers and workers, which allowed our hawker centres, wet markets and coffee shops to maintain operations and serve the local communities. This rostered routine testing at Covered Plaza in Toa Payoh East and Lorong 8 Toa Payoh has played a part to reassure safety to residents and hawker patrons in those markets. On behalf of the residents and hawkers at Toa Payoh East constituency, I really do commend the swift efforts by the agencies which minimized COVID-19 driven disruptions for all. So even as we emerge from the pandemic and transit back into the more in-person activities and interactions, I hope the government and communities alike will continue to sustain the momentum behind our digitalization efforts post-COVID. Mr. Speaker, sir, as a Deloitte Insights report points out, following COVID-19, governments should strive to transform their operations not only in healthcare, but in areas like service delivery, workforce, regulation, and procurement. I'm proud that Singapore is in the lead, taking stock of what they have done well and what can be improved from its response to this crisis of a generation. However, we cannot stop at these conclusions. With the support of the public, private, and people sectors, I have faith that we will act specifically to make us more resilient and prepared for the next crisis, whenever it hits in whatever form. So I support the motion.